Tonight, we're going to be talking about sports betting. And before you place any bets amongst yourselves about who's going to win the debate, let's gauge what the crowd thinks. So for those of you online streaming at civil.com and those of you here in the audience, take your phones out, put the beer down, and scan this QR code here. Let's see what you think. This is an Oxford-style debate. So while you're doing this, I'm going to explain the basic setup for the structure of the conversation and the debate that's going to follow. So while we gauge your interest here, after we see the results, the preliminary results, we're going to turn over to debaters who will each have 10 minutes to argue for the proposition and against it. They will have 5 minutes each for rebuttal. We're going to go to audience Q&A from you all here, and again, those streaming in from Civil. And then we're going to go to 5 minutes each for concluding remarks before we get this QR code back up on the screen and see who was persuasive, who wasn't persuasive, who owes who a beer at the end of the night. So has everyone had a chance to check out the QR code? I'm seeing overwhelming nods. Okay, so with that, let's get our debaters up to their seats and let me introduce them. So please come on up and give them a hand here. All right. So on my far left, we have the proposition that we have the gentleman arguing for the proposition, Jude Russo. Jude is the managing editor of the American Conservative and a contributing editor at the New York Sun. He is a 2024-25 James Madison Fellow at Hillsdale College and was named one of the ISI Top 20 Under 30 for 2024. To my immediate left, we have Guy Bentley. Guy is the Director of Consumer Freedom at the Reason Foundation. Bentley's research focuses on the taxation and regulation of nicotine, tobacco, alcohol, and food. You had a clever phrase to describe this portfolio of research earlier. What was it?
Vices that are legal that we want to keep legal.
Okay, all right. And before joining the Reason Foundation, Bentley served as a reporter in London and Washington, D.C. So with that, we're going to turn it over for the 10-minute opening statement for the proposition for tonight's debate: should sports betting be banned? And that is going to be Jude on the far left. So you'll have 10 minutes. Keep your eyes over here. We'll have time cards. And for the audience, please keep it down to a murmur so we have everyone here and streaming online available to listen.
All right. Can everybody hear me? Yes? Okay, good. Thanks to AIER and Young Voices for hosting this event tonight. And thank you to you all for being here. There are more exciting ways to spend a Thursday night, I would think, but I'm glad you're here. I have been given the unenviable task of defending a proposition that almost 70% of Americans disagree with, namely that sports betting ought to be banned. As the economist Phil Magnus, known I think to some people here, said with his characteristic charm on Twitter while poo-pooing this event, this is not a contentious issue unless you believe that the government has a say over private transactions between consenting individuals. This attitude is representative of an admirable American impulse. It's none of your business what I'm doing with my money. There are, however, activities that produce negative externalities. That is to say, someone else's private transactions become my problem. The cluster of behaviors, given the traditional appellation of vice, fall into this class of activities. The state, therefore, has traditionally taken a hand in regulating vice to protect people like you and me from these negative externalities, and sometimes banning vice outright. To take an obvious example, the consumption of alcohol, drinking, is constrained in most of America by open container laws. Some portion of drinkers become unruly while under the influence, even violent or dangerous to themselves. And so the state has decided to limit the places and often the times in which they may imbibe. What are the negative externalities of gambling? Why is gambling traditionally regarded as a vice? Well, there are a variety of negative externalities, which we'll get to, I think, during the rebuttals and concluding statements. The foremost reasoning in the traditional regulatory body of law is economic. In the aggregate, and of necessity in most individual cases, gamblers lose money. The vig or the take is the unalterable law of gambling. The organizer must always be paid, even in games where your left hand is playing against your right hand. If your left hand loses and your right hand wins, you have less money at the end because the organizer is doing this for a price. This is the essence of gambling. You are paying for a chance to lose your money. Therefore, the compulsive gambler can easily waste his substance, to use a somewhat old-fashioned turn of phrase, because wasting his substance is indeed the service being offered. The cost of this waste of substance, bankruptcies, mortgage defaults, the loss of housing for families, and so on, are carried by non-consenting third parties, that is to say, by me, someone whose credit is made more expensive, someone who pays mortgage insurance, someone who gives tax and charity for poor relief. We have therefore traditionally constrained gambling to particular places and times to limit the opportunity for the pathological gambler to lose money and thereby make himself society's problem. Thus, the limit on number of casinos and racetracks, the constraint of track days and track times. And this finally brings us to the proposition under consideration, sports betting. In its primary form, digital sportsbook, the spatial and temporal limits on losing your substance, wasting your substance, are abolished. It is now possible to take out your phone and lay bets on sports happening halfway around the world in different time zones at any hour of the day in increasingly exotic configurations of action. There is no natural break on the activity. It is no wonder that handles, that is to say the amount wagered, and the proportion of Americans betting have both risen monotonically since the court legalized sportsbook nationally with the overturn of PASPA, which was the federal law banning sports betting across the country. The dysfunctions associated with gambling have also increased monotonically. In the 38 states that have legalized sportsbook, bankruptcies have increased at a 28% advantage over states that did not. That is to say, the second derivative for the math people in there is almost 30% steeper. Similarly, 8% increase in rate of debt collection. This was a 2024 paper out of UCLA. Similarly, in aggregate, in these states, credit scores, unsurprisingly, have decreased and have been decreasing every year that sports betting has been legal. This, by the way, is consonant with studies going back to the 90s on the disparity between gambling and non-gambling jurisdictions. This is not a flash-in-the-pan finding. This, at least on the surface, looks like good data. To return to the premise, vice is regulated when it becomes society's problem. That is, your problem and my problem. Even modest increases in default rates can trigger large problems. The mortgage delinquency rate in the second quarter of 2008, for those of you who were alive back then, this is a pretty young crowd, was 4.5%. This is no longer merely the concern of two consenting private individuals. Any fair consideration of a ban must account for the benefits lost. I suspect in a moment here my learned friend will parade some numbers for you about the grand economic benefits of sports betting. I will touch on two quickly, just so that we can get the obvious fatuities out of the way and get to the deeper foolishness beneath. Sportsbook creates jobs. This is true. The nature of digital sportsbook, however, is that you do not actually need very many people to run a sportsbook. FanDuel, which is a top 10 online sportsbook owned by the Irish for whatever reason, employs about Really? That's what got you people? Employs about 3,700 people. Not to be sneezed at. That's a major company. But by contrast, Foxwoods Casino, a legacy gambling operation, employs in the ballpark of 15,000. That is one casino. If you are interested in maximizing employment by gambling, you will encourage the spread of legacy gambling operations, sportsbook, which bleeds off of them, perhaps not so much. Another vaunted benefit, the determinative one for most lawmakers, is the advantage accrued to state treasuries on tax from gambling concerns. This has always seemed like a strange argument to me when it comes out of the mouths of libertarians, but it does get put out there. Libertarians for tax is a bumper sticker I have proposed but been shot down. These benefits have been modest at best. Maryland's revenues from the first 2 years of legal sportsbook, in which roughly $800 million were wagered, $21 million. For context, Maryland's annual budget in 2024 was $64 billion. $21 million across 2 years is a rounding error and not a very large one. Lest you think I've cherry-picked the most favorable example, Kansas, for the first 3 quarters of 2022, when they legalized sportsbook, I believe, in which 3 quarters, $350 million were wagered, realized $271,000 in revenue. Paying the tax collectors was more expensive than the revenue that was brought in by the tax. My time is running short, so I'll wrap this up. Any ban on a human activity must be considered carefully. Our economic freedom in this country is our strength. Nevertheless, to allow the rights of one group to engage in activities that cause significant cross-social harm and risk yet more radical catastrophes in the future seems neither prudent nor just. This is my problem and your problem. I cede the rest of my time.
And now to the opposition. Go on. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you again to Young Voices and the American Institute for Economic Research for putting on this debate. And it's a pleasure to be debating with Jude, whose writings in the American Conservative are appointment reading. The idea that legal sports betting was a mistake and that we should return to a ban is the trendy, high-status, conventional wisdom that has calcified in much of our intelligentsia over the last few years. From the New York Times to the Manhattan Institute, from Jacobin to the American Conservative, all are agreed that vice is out, public health is back, and now the only thing more ubiquitous than sports betting ads are the think pieces and podcasts decrying them. Those left defending sports betting are a motley crew of unfashionable libertarians, barstool conservatives, and of course a majority of the American people. Now, just because most people support a ban on sports betting doesn't mean that it's right, but I am so rarely on the right side of public opinion, you'll please indulge my conversion to Vox Populi, Vox Dei. But I understand where the proposition is coming from. People are sick of sports betting ads. Several papers suggest an increase in financial distress for some citizens living in states with newly legal sports betting. In some, it's alleged that problem gambling is skyrocketing, financial distress will increase, and games are being corrupted. We're told the previous regime, with little enforcement against either bettors or bookmakers, but no mass commercialization, is preferable to the status quo and had few to any downsides. Over the course of the evening, I'll try to tackle all these misconceptions, but let's start with rates of problem gambling, which are not skyrocketing. Speaking to Congress last year, the head of the National Council on Problem Gambling placed the number of people with a severe gambling problem at around 1%, with another 2 to 3% experiencing mild to moderate problems. This is exactly in line with the historical average. But how can that be when calls to gambling addiction services and hotlines have soared in states where sports betting has been legalized? Well, for one thing, around 30 to 40% of those calls are not from problem gamblers seeking help, but from gamblers seeking help trying to place bets. Now, as sports betting ads increase, so does advertising for addiction services, which is again why the National Council on Problem Gambling says on its website, these data should not be used as a proxy to estimate problem gambling prevalence. At a more granular level, most states don't collect good data on problem gambling, but one that does is New Jersey, which was the second state to legalize sports betting in 2018. In 2023, the rate of problem gambling in New Jersey was 6%, far in excess of the national average. Apps, legal sports betting. But what was it in 2017? It was 6.3%. There's been no change since sports betting was legalized. Nevada has had legal sports betting since 1949 and launched sports betting apps in 2010. Again, no change in the problem gambling rate. It's true several papers suggest a rise in financial distress for a minority of people in states where sports betting has been made legal. But it's important to recognize when, for instance, we hear about large increases in bankruptcies, one of the reasons we see such large increases is because we're operating from an incredibly low baseline, which can exaggerate the effect. The academics themselves who published this paper described these findings as rare, while also acknowledging the benefits of taking an existing sports betting market out of the black market, and most bettors finding it a harmless form of fun, and states glad of the revenue, which we'll talk about later. The literature suggests that whatever financial distress we've seen in the short term is primarily driven, but not exclusively, by low-income young men who are the least risk-averse demographic in the country. But the answer to a concentrated harm, even if it is just spending your own money recklessly, is to target or ameliorate that problem. The response should not be to ban a product or an industry that leaves 96 to 99% of the population unscathed. In some tentative good news, increases in risky gambling behavior appear to have leveled off last year. And at the extreme end of the spectrum that people think about with the problems of gambling, which is suicide, researchers find no link between sports betting legalization and suicide rates. The truth about those who bet on sports is that unlike other forms of gambling, it heavily skews to the well or overeducated, depending on your point of view, and those more likely to earn more than $100,000 a year, with 2/3 spending between $1 and $100 a month. But why am I so confident that sports betting isn't going to lead to greater financial distress or addiction, especially in that population of lower-income young men? Two reasons. First is the previous experiences we've had with gambling liberalizations, and the second is from other countries that have had sports betting legal for a long time. Firstly, an 2013 analysis found that the legalization of casinos and lotteries across the states in the 80s and early 90s did initially lead to a statistically significant increase in bankruptcies, but this association disappeared after 1995. With the rise of the internet, the poker boom, and online offshore illegal sportsbooks in the 2000s, many were certain we were in for another disaster. But in 2011, one of the world's pioneers of gambling addiction research, Henry Schaefer, found that the evidence suggests the rates of gambling addiction remained relatively stable during the past 35 years, despite, quote, an unprecedented increase in opportunities and access to gambling, unquote. He added that the extent of internet gambling for most is astoundingly moderate, and problem gamblers are more likely to get better than worse. Now, with smartphones, apps, advertising, and AI, we're being told once again the risks are too great to legally permit adults to spend their own money on something they enjoy. So what's happened in countries that have had legal sports betting and advertising on and offline for, say, around 20 years? For that, we can look at the UK and Australia. The rate of problem gambling in the UK has remained stable ever since we started measuring it in 1999. The same is also true for Australia, despite the fact that Australians bet the most per capita of any country in the world. Contrast this with China, which bans all forms of gambling and has no mass commercialization of the industry, which, according to the restrictionist logic, should mean there's less problem gambling and less of its associated harms. China has the highest problem gambling rate in the world. Even one of the country's leading sports betting critics, Harry Levant, who wrote legislation for Senator Blumenthal last year to restrict sports betting marketing, is adamant sports betting shouldn't be banned. The era before legal sports betting was not a happy one. Before legalization, around 1/3 of Americans bet on sports, betting roughly $150 billion a year, 97% of it illegally, with offshore sportsbooks funneling rivers of cash to criminal enterprises, bettors more at risk of identity theft and fraud, no age checks or safety measures to protect the integrity of the game or problem gamblers. Legalization, on the other hand, has hammered the illicit market, and tens of millions are enjoying spending their money on to make games more exciting, with legal operators subject to the rule of law. Objections to particular marketing practices, prop bets, and the like are worthy of discussion, but it's a far cry from a total ban on sports betting. It was a failure in the past and would be a failure again. So vote against the motion.
Thank you. Great. So let's now turn to the first round of rebuttals, and we'll go to the far left for the proposition to start.
Yeah. 5 minutes. Okay. My learned friend raises some very good points about the fact that problem gambling rates, that is the number of individuals who engage in problem gambling, are static. What is different is that a difference that digital sportsbook does provide is that there are more opportunities for problem gamblers to get into serious trouble. I think that the fact that handles are increasing sits in tension with the fact that with this idea that we have merely taken a bunch of black market activity and put it on the white market. The numbers on economic distress, I hesitate to take parallels from other countries terribly seriously because they have had different gambling regimes for much longer. This is something new that we have introduced in the United States. We are, in fact, seeing changes in the economic distress. I think that this is something worth considering. The fact that something novel has been introduced. We are not necessarily culturally as well prepared as the degenerates in Australia and Great Britain to handle such opportunities, and we should dial it back a bit. I would also note that there are other negative externalities. There is a high correlation between sports gambling and domestic abuse, even in cases where we're not dealing with problem gamblers. The one that we have neither of us have really touched yet are the challenges to sports integrity. While in the UK they have fewer problems with this, in the United States, the first few years of sports betting has seen a massive increase in people who are involved in the sport in some way betting and thereby compromising the integrity of sports. Just 3 days ago, there was a Major League Baseball umpire who was found to be in possession of accounts betting on Major League Baseball. That is a problem, and this is novel. The American people historically seem to care about sports integrity. We don't want everything to turn into professional wrestling. I think that that's fair enough. When you look at the surveys on approval for gambling, people are worried about challenges to sports integrity. So I think that is a cultural factor that's worth considering. I cede the rest of my time.
Okay, second round of rebuttal from the opposition.
Thank you. 1 sec. I just need to grab my phone for a little show and tell display in a second.
The handle's increasing. The handle, i.e. the amount of people bet, in the United States last year legally it was 120 billion. It was 150 billion, 97% in the illegal market, pre-legal sports betting. So whether net handle has increased is questionable, but also I would challenge the notion that the net handle increasing would be a problem at all. Jude brings up that it's easier to bet
now than it was pre-sports betting legalization. Perhaps if we ban sports betting apps or sports betting, that would at least introduce some friction into how easily people can bet and so on. So this is an offshore sports book based in Curacao. The United States has no authority to regulate this at all. You can download it on your phone. Here's some of the things it says. Get ready to play sports, casino, poker. Score up to $3,750 in welcome bonuses. Sports, esports, live betting, hundreds of casino games. Boost your play with crypto. Nothing suspicious about that at all.
So why has
Sorry, one second. To join, okay, to create your account, you put in your information and you tick a box to certify your age. We're not talking about banning sports betting. We're talking about whether this is the alternative to what we have now. Secondly, tax revenue. It's true, tax revenue from sports betting is de minimis compared to other industries. But for instance, in Michigan, it made up 1% of the state's tax revenue, 1% of the budget. Try convincing state legislatures to cut 1% of the budget. This is not an insignificant amount relative to its harm. Domestic abuse. I'm glad Jude brought this up because there was a study that came out suggesting states with legalized sports betting see increased domestic abuse when there is an upset victory or loss on a game day. This is essentially trying to replicate a study and apply it to sports betting that David Carr, the Nobel Prize winner, did in around 2012, before sports betting was legal, and he found that upset games increased domestic abuse. You know what else is correlated with domestic abuse? Good weather, vacations, and so on. Also traffic. Traffic is heavily correlated with domestic abuse, but that's not a case for a $50 congestion charge. So trying to regulate the emotional triggers of wife beaters through policy is not a wise idea. The policy should be to put those people in prison, not to regulate how much we bet. In terms of scandals, I don't think it's hard to verify whether there's been an increase in either, say, corruption or sports betting scandals. We haven't seen that in Europe. And of course, one of the problems is beforehand, we didn't know how much of it was going on. Now there are sports betting integrity monitors who monitor patterns of play and betting lines to detect suspicious activity, see if there needs to be some intervention and so on. I believe a case Jude wrote about either yesterday or the day before about it was either the
I haven't written about sports betting. I haven't written about sports betting this week.
It was it must have been an older article, but it was on somebody who had essentially cheating a game and so on. But the problem is, and this is used as part of the case of why sports betting is corrupting the game. The problem is this person was located in California, where sports betting is already banned and hasn't been legalized. So net finding effects of the integrity of the game, I think, is unfair at best. If we do see that change, I think it needs to be looked at. But of course, the counterfactual is we've always had sports betting scandals. Even in the 1980s, when Boston College threw a game to Harvard because they were being paid to shave points by the Lucchese crime family, this is not unknown to the United States. And now we have better ways to monitor betting patterns, to police players, but obviously nothing is foolproof. But I reject the notion that we've seen a measurable increase in sports betting corruption so far. And I'll leave it at that.
Excellent. So with this, we are going to turn to questions which have been gathered from Civil, the folks streaming in online, and hopefully questions that have been brewing in the audience here. So with that, let's get some hands up. We'll have questions filter in online from Civil, and Casey will be bringing the mic to the question askers now seated in the center of the theater.
Thank you. We'll take the first few questions from the audience here. Please ask it in the form of a question. Do not abuse your mic privileges. So I'm going to have to pass it down too. We'll start with you two over here.
Hi. Thanks for the debate. I just wanted to give the AF more of an ability to unpack the practicalities of making sports gambling illegal in terms of what the sentencing would be, what the fine would be for wrongdoers, and moreover, if there's any consideration given to the ensuing black market that may emerge by making sports gambling illegal, and whether those practices could be more exploitative. Thank you.
Sure. So there is a model for this. the 2006 Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, which was passed in response to the explosion of online poker playing in the United States. It's fairly simple. This act said if you are operating a gambling concern digitally in a state where it is illegal, and then you deposit the money from that, you are violating the Wire Fraud Act, and bad things will happen to you per the Wire Fraud Act. 18 months after this was passed, the FBI, which had used to enforce laws in this country, after gathering information on the prospective targets, arrested 11 CEOs of gambling operations, charged them with money laundering and wire fraud, and put them in jail with the pursuant penalties, which I believe, and perhaps my learned friend can tell me, I think it's in the ballpark of 10 to 20.
I believe so.
Yeah. So there are enforcement mechanisms available. There is precedent for banning something that previously had not been banned at the federal level and enforcing it. By the way, that did, in fact, arrest the growth of online poker. The FBI's complete disinterest in enforcing the law following that sting meant that there is growth again. And now, obviously, the regulatory environment's sort of unsettled. So internet poker is back in a big way in this country. But it was successful on the terms of it. To address a point that my learned friend brought up, people will always do illegal things. And you are never going to catch all of them. But you do pass a law to ameliorate the amount of crime, to discourage the amount of crime, and to set an example. What was the second part of your question?
It was essentially about that you know, when you make something...
Black market. The idea that turning a black market activity to a white market activity gets rid of black markets simply is not borne out by other deregulatory regimes. The cannabis black market in states where cannabis has been legalized is still thriving because the black market operations do not have the same types of overhead that white market operations do. They don't pay taxes. They don't necessarily need to pay a fair wage. They can engage in all the chicanery and violence of organized crime. So the idea that making black market activity legal is going to obliterate, the great gaming crime families of Macau and Italy or wherever, I don't think really holds up.
Just a response to that, AIER, the unpleasant acronym for the act Jude was mentioning in 2000s, did not arrest much of the poker boom at all. Three of the 5 largest poker sites in the US continue to operate regardless of the law. And I think they were only shut down, including PokerStars, in 2010 or 2011, whereas the rest of the market just moved offline. The problem is AIER only tackles US-based companies. If you are registered or you're based in Antigua or Curacao or Costa Rica or the Dominican Republic, the US has no authority. Attorneys general can write very strongly worded letters that promptly get thrown in the trash.
It really sucks that we have no leverage over foreign countries.
You don't have leverage over independently operating foreign criminals in those countries.
You do have leverage over foreign law enforcement, though.
The U.S. tried several times for Antigua to try and shut down their illegal sportsbook. Nothing has happened. Nothing will happen. Again, it's a shifting industry, and it'll move again. And the FBI, the much maligned as well, I agree, has been very clear about the connections between these sportsbooks and organized crime, particularly the Russian mafia, the Armenian mafia, the Cosa Nostra in both Philadelphia and New York. There is piles of cash when this market is illegal flowing there. And now, of course, black markets will always exist. There's still illicit markets for alcohol in this country, of course. about 75% of sports bets in this country are now placed legally. That is a huge dent in the black market. To say this doesn't make a difference doesn't matter. And also, Jude, you said we can dial it back a bit. What you're supporting here is a full-scale prohibition of sports betting.
Yeah.
In fact, what you're proposing would be even stricter than what we had before the repeal of PASPA, because presumably you want Nevada to ban sports betting as well.
Yes.
Where it's been legal for 70 years. So dialing it back a little bit.
PASPA was a bad law. No, it will dial back the social dysfunction associated with the banned activity. That's what happens when you ban activities.
It'll dial back the dysfunction. I don't think the problem is when you ban these activities, social dysfunction will increase. We did see this with the prohibition of alcohol. We do see this with drugs. If the social dysfunction increases when you ban the activity,
Then why has there been an increase in economic distress, right?
Because I think in the immediate, and I mentioned this with the liberalization of casinos and lotteries in the 1980s and early 1990s. And Rachel Volberg, one of the country's leading experts on gambling and gambling addiction, says you do initially see in the wake of a liberalization, because more people are betting, you might see those who wouldn't otherwise have bet, who are in precarious circumstances, bet. But eventually,
I was given to understand.
Now, and Tay, go to the next question, who's been patiently waiting.
All right, thanks for the debate. I just wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on legalizing betting on elections? Because I know there's a decent amount of people online who are into that, and it's kind of like a legal gray area, and I just wanted to get you, both your thoughts on the subject.
I'm not going to defend propositions that I'm not paid to be here to defend. I made a lot of money betting on this election, so I'm disinclined personally to take too strong a stance publicly. I think that my considered opinion, considered for 30 seconds, is I don't care very much.
I'm totally in favor of it. Prediction markets are great. They should all be legalized. And I believe betting on elections is legal in some way, Kalshi or some of the other ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Other questions from the live audience here? One, yes.
So, banned was a pretty broad term used in this debate, and I think you all took it to mean, legal banning. But maybe, let's zoom in a little bit. Would you be open to, banning sports betting apps on your phone, for example, and kind of keeping, the way Las Vegas does it or did it previously, which is you had to go, to a sports book to place bets? Does that perhaps mitigate some of the harms that come from kind of the immediate gratification or satisfaction of sports betting?
Certainly, it reintroduces the sort of temporal and spatial limits on problem gamblers and their ability to engage in their harmful activities. That said, I was brought here to defend a simple proposition, which is ban sports betting. I think that when it comes to affairs of state, you usually end up with something in between all A or all B answer. That said, in this particular case, I do think that if you have to choose between one or the other, a full ban, as I was asked to defend, is the way to go. Whether the actual ideal lives somewhere between what I've been asked to defend and what we have now, I'm happy to talk about that afterwards, but that's not why I'm here.
I would say that, it's with banning these products, I think even if you just restricted this to the online, so imagine if you kept legal sports betting and we're just going to go after apps and so on. These are already here. It's not like we have any authority to stop them. It's just that the regulation is looser and there's going to be more problems in downloading these apps and using them from others. Also, they don't have the kind of safeguards the legal operators have, for instance, self-exclusion programs, where essentially if you opt into it, you're essentially banned from using the app. One thing I would like to see, though, is either companies getting together or states getting together, even, God forbid, a federal legislation to ensure that there is a federal self-exclusion list, so you don't go from, say, one state to the other to avoid the self-exclusion you've put on yourself for betting. And those programs have been highly effective for problem gambles.
I would like to push back on this idea that we are totally powerless to use American influence abroad to bring about law enforcement outcomes. 10,000 troops are headed to the Mexican border right now because we sent a mean tweet at the president of Mexico. We can, in fact, make other countries do what we want. That is the extravagant privilege of being an American. So the idea that, there'll always be the Macau games or there'll always be Antigua. Yes, you will always be playing whack-a-mole. That is sort of the nature of enforcing the law. But I reject this premise that there's nothing to be done. We simply haven't tried very hard.
I mean, the thing to do is have a legal, safer market. And I think one of the things Jude is missing is, we mentioned jobs earlier. The reason why legalized sports betting has created jobs, both direct jobs in the industry and then induced jobs, and then jobs from people newly employed spending their money. The reason why these are net job increases is because you're taking money that was in an illicit market and it's being brought back to the United States to spend here. We're not having mass numbers of bookies unemployed. These are new jobs being created and so on, and economic benefits. So I'm not, the idea that the US, we have such influence, we can properly enforce the law. We still can't stop fentanyl coming into the country. The idea that we're going to stop online betting apps, I think, is for the birds.
Let's hold there and take a question from Civil if we have one, or if not, from the live audience.
We don't have a question from Civil quite yet, so I want to encourage those of you watching online, if you're registered with Civil, please type your question. Or also, if you're listening in on X, you can tag at joinyoungvoices.com, and I'll be checking Young Voices account to take your question there. So we'll take another one from the live audience here. Yeah.
So regarding sports integrity, do you take issue with leagues like the NFL being considered entertainment rather than sport, therefore they can influence the results of matches?
That whatever my own personal feelings about it are, the majority of the American people do take issue with that. And I think that is something worth accounting for when you're dicking around with social norms legally.
Another question right up here.
Questions for my colleague. Given the ease of black market gambling, is legalizing gambling maybe worse in that it encourages people to bet in regulated and taxed markets instead of a less regulated, less taxed market?
As in, it would be preferable to keep the illegal market.
Exactly. I deprive the state of revenue.
I don't believe so. I am not as state of nature libertarian. I'm more of a minimal classical liberal libertarian. I like to enjoy the benefits of great companies offering good products and rather avoid the skeezy sports book who might break your legs or so on. And unfortunately, when we did have illegal sports betting, there was enforcement to an extent that also had pretty devastating consequences. In Fairfax, Virginia, not too far down the road, Sal Kosi, I think his name was shot and killed outside his home in 2006 by SWAT officers because they had tried to trap him in an illegal sports betting ring. And he was trying to be busted for placing sports bets and organizing this just before Super Bowl Sunday of that year. So this is not costless just in terms of regulating people's ease of access. The more enforcement you want, the more trouble you will have, and we're not going to clamp down on the gambling. Prevalence, problem gambling, again, is stable regardless of the legal regime, the handle. This isn't going to make a difference. And people should be... Gambling is entertainment. It's hard for people who don't gamble a lot to kind of understand that, but gambling is fun. It's an entertainment. And people engage in all kinds of vices, and people are going to supply them with those vices. They prefer alcohol to milk on a night out. They prefer erotica to Shakespeare. And unfortunately, people are going to supply them with those vices. And the situation we have now is far better to what we had 5 to 6 years ago.
Thank you. I have one question from a friend who is watching online. Stephen Kent from the Consumer Choice Institute, Consumer Choice Center asks, What are the best regulations you've seen in the States on online sports betting that protects consumers and puts some barriers between gamblers and problem betting?
I think the best tool is a self-exclusion list for problem gamblers. In terms of marketing, advertising, or ease of play, it's difficult because, one, you don't want to catch up the vast majority of people who are playing responsibly. However, I think one thing that could be massively improved is giving consumers better information on the odds of parlay bets and what they're actually doing when they place a parlay bet. These are, for instance, the sports betting industry, they have a profit margin of about 5%, which is not major for most industries. But when people place parlay bets, which are inherently more risky because you need several chains of things to happen, the profit margin increases by 10 to 15%. And the odds are unclear, the payouts are unclear. I think there could be a lot more transparency, maybe even, I'd have to look at it, but maybe even regulation in that area. Information is necessary to consumers. If companies are either hiding it or making it deliberately obscure, I think consumer protection laws are totally fine.
I think it's also worth mentioning that as legislation exists now, when a gambling app offers you that bonus when you sign up, that is tax deductible, providing other conditions. I think that tightening up legislation so that gambling companies have to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more forthright, as my learned friend suggested, about what you are signing up for and how you get your money out, and not encouraging them to do these things that are catnip for problem gamblers is worth looking into. Something that is not widely known in this country is that at many states, the American Gaming Association's model legislation was adopted without alterations, and they're representing an interest. They don't really care about you that much. They are trying to make money, and that's what they're there to do. So I think that revisiting a lot of the legalization regimes that were introduced in these places in a fairly hasty, unconsidered way is worthwhile and will reduce much of the dysfunction. Of course, that would require lawmakers actually doing their jobs, but hope springs eternal.
Thanks. We will take more questions from the live audience here, but before we do, I just want to encourage those watching online to keep submitting questions through the Civil app if you're registered, or on X, tag @JoinYoungVoices. All right, next question. Yes.
Okay, so this is the guy who's pro-banning it. You said there were like 3 that I counted externalities that you cited as a reason why you were anti-sports betting. All of them seem kind of minor and easily explainable or applicable to other things. So do you have like a philosophical or like moral reason why you're against it, or?
Just because the same kinds of ills result from other sorts of activities does not mean we should legalize an activity that produces more of these ills. I also, as I tried to bring out in my opening statement, you don't actually need to dicky with credit markets that much to produce large ripple effects. The increase in financial distress, which we have seen, you can talk about how it's going to plateau in the near future, but we have seen this right now, I think, is determinative. I have tried to stay away from the other 2 issues, domestic abuse and sports integrity, because I'm not going to try to get a crowd full of libertarians to actually care about people. I'm going to try to make them see that this does affect them.
Just an account, the study regarding credit and credit ratings, Hollenbeck from UCLA.
Well, the credit studies one was the Northwestern study.
Is it Northwestern? There's Taylor.
And the UCLA one was the increase in defaults and debt collections.
In terms of credit, I believe my colleague Jacob Rich looked at that paper and said the average client credit ratings, looking at the study, it was I think 0.3%. Yeah, which actually is statistically too low for it to be inferred as core. So it could be suggestive for sure. I think the effects are so. Again, I think what the question is getting at is very good. When you're talking about general effects that might or might not ripple and then might go down in later years, these effects I think are too attenuated to be a direct externality that you should actually take to account in policy. It's a broadening of the harm principle to such an extent that, for instance, so many other kind of leisure activities, whether you consider them vices or not, there would be grounds for restriction. 30 to 40% of Americans are considering going into debt this year to go on vacation. Whether that's a vice or virtue, we think that's a positive social goal, but we cannot write legislation to micromanage people's personal financial decisions, particularly when those people are the least risk averse in the country.
I understand what you're saying, but first off, a 30% increase in your second derivative is not to be sneezed at. And the argument that people do dumb things in other spheres of their lives does not justify legalizing another thing that will be abusive for them. Just because people are thinking about going into debt to go to Aruba does not mean that we should now say you can do that and also go into debt on a parlay on whether the Ravens are going to fumble this week.
I suppose there would be always the question, who is the we, considering it's not our money?
Well, except that it is money. I pay mortgage insurance because I have a mortgage. I am compelled to take mortgage insurance. When people default on their mortgages, that affects my mortgage insurance rate. Sure. The market is also a tool for distributing costs. When you bring in costs from social dysfunction, it's not like these are only borne by the people who are engaging in the activity. Whether the costs are distributed by the state or by the market, they do come out.
But with these costs, what we've had with legalization is that both the tax revenue that is raised and also the bringing in of revenue of money that was already being bet in a pre-existing market to the legal market on a net financial analysis would more than make up for any externalities. So if we're looking at on net, it's been a massive financial positive.
Let's take another question.
Yes, we are getting some questions from the online audience. So we have one. If sports betting is legal, should betting companies be held accountable for predatory practices like targeting problem gamblers?
Yeah, I think if it can be demonstrated, for instance, that a betting company is targeting a problem gambler, either, for instance, one of the controversies that we had are some companies employing what they call, VIP hosts, in which you are constantly your highest spending customers, those who are spending the most on gambling, you will get a private host by one of these companies who will email you either free tickets to, sports games or concerts and so on, and will, constantly keep in touch with you about your betting and so on. And this is dependent on how much you bet. Obviously, for a lot of people, if you, in many areas of life, if you spend a lot on something, the company is going to have a particular interest in you, and so on. The problem with gambling is you can exactly target that vulnerable population. So I would have to look at the specific example, but if it's found that a company is targeting specific problem gamblers, also while knowing their financial circumstances and seeing that they're even more strained, then yeah, I have absolutely no problem going after companies hammer and tongs if they do that.
I actually tend to think that if an activity is legal, you have to let the companies engage in the activity as they see fit. I wish that I grew up around here and there used to be a Bombay Sapphire advertisement that sat right next to a repo lot here on New York Avenue. That is what you would call targeting a problem population. And we are fine with it because we understand that the liquor companies are in the business of selling liquor. I think that you start to get into fuzzy questions about equality under the law when you say, well, you can market to this set of people, but not to that set of people.
Another question from online. Should betting on amateur or college sports be banned to prevent exploitation of young athletes?
Well, I'm here defending the proposition that they should all be banned. I don't see why the relative youth of those being corrupted matters.
Yep, I agree. But however, there is one form of gambling that I do want to ban, and I think Jude and I will agree on this, which is state lotteries. The government shouldn't be running restaurants, shouldn't be running liquor companies, shouldn't be running any kind of entertainment services. Gambling is a form of entertainment. State lotteries should be abolished. They're terrible. They're one of the most regressive forms of gambling. For every $100 you spend on lottery tickets, generally a 30 are returned to the bettor. For sports betting, every $100 you spend, 90 are returned. So keep sports betting legal, legalize in more states, but ban state lotteries.
Go back to the live audience here in D.C. Yes.
So I have a question for the pro-ban side. I guess I didn't really understand the way you responded to the objections from vacation, for example, because it seems to be that you're arguing in the sense that it's an addition to vices, but it seems to me that the question is about consistent moral principles. If you state that something should be banned merely because some people do dumb things, why shouldn't other things also be banned because some people do dumb things? It's not addition, it's about a consistent moral principle. So I don't understand that objection. And I had one more question about your notion of externality. It seems that you use externality in ways where if the price increases for something, even if it's a rights action, like if I demand more food and therefore the price for food increases for you, that is an externality, and therefore it costs more for you and therefore we should stop it. It seems that that's the way you were using externality. So if someone had more debt because they took a dumb action, that was you were liable for that. So I didn't really understand that as well.
So to the first point, I'm merely saying that I'm not terribly troubled by issues of moral consistency. I think that people do things that are bad in this sphere of life doesn't really have to do with whether another sphere should be examined on the same terms. So I sort of reject the premise there. You are, in fact, opening up a new vice market. I don't see what vacations really have to do with anything. If we can play this game, with the other traditional vice industries, because liquor is legal, you have to make cannabis legal. Well, I see what you're saying, but I think that these are basically different things, right? I do think that a difference with gambling is that is the addictive component. People are not generally thought to be addicted to buying vacations they can't afford. I'm happy to hear carping from the social scientists in the audience about that. The fact that there is not actually a service being provided besides losing money in concrete terms. And you can talk about, it's entertainment, you're buying fun. Fine. But that's like saying you're buying fun when you go get a drink or go get a movie. In those cases, you are actually being given a good. If you go to the cat house, you are being rendered services. With gambling, losing money is the service being offered. So I think that it's distinct from other spheres in which you have people behaving badly. To the second point, I think it's, as I said, I'm not that interested in consistency. People do, in fact, buy food, and that drives the price mechanism. I think that we all agree, though, that when people engage in dysfunctional activities and the costs are borne elsewhere, that is a different type of thing from just engaging in a market. So that's sort of I realize I'm not giving a really pithy answer here, but those are sort of the broad distinctions I would draw.
That's a good place to start. And as we pivot into the concluding remarks, the closing statements, I'll remind everyone that on the topic of vices, there is a bar outside. So if you'd like to grab another drink before we pivot, please do so. And as is custom, we will give the opposition the first opening salvo of concluding remarks, and then we'll conclude with Jude. So please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to Jude for a really enlightening discussion. I've spoken quite a bit about the harms of banning sports betting. I'll just mention one more. In 2012, Andrew Wong shot and killed his bookmaker, and he also killed a friend who was an intermediary for another bookmaker. He owed them $9,000 in illegal bets from bets he had placed illegally on sports. At the end of his trial, the prosecutor showed a message that Wong had sent to a friend before the murders. Wong asked, "Would you rather owe money to a bank or to someone you can kill?" In so many words, he explains why we should have legal markets where disputes are solved through the rule of law rather than extortion or violence. I don't believe that after running so many failed experiments in prohibition, and we're not opening up a new vice market, the market already existed, it's just being brought into the white market, that we need to experiment with this again. Sports betting is still illegal in 10 states, including 2 of the richest and most populous, and yet there's already an amazing push to try and get sports betting banned again or regulated to the point where most consumers won't want to patronize American businesses. Now, if even semi-authoritarian countries in the developing world, like the UK and Australia and Sweden and Finland and Italy and Germany, can manage a legal sports betting market with game integrity and minimal harm and depriving organized crime of billions of dollars, it is ludicrous to think that America can't do so as well. I believe it was a few months ago, Jude did a fantastic interview with the head of the National Prohibition Party, or their presidential candidate, and he told Jude, in regards to our signature issue of alcohol, it is important to note that we are not looking to bring back national prohibition or take away anyone's beer. This is not your grandfather's Prohibition Party. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I stand shoulder to shoulder with the National Prohibition Party. The genuine copper-bottom prohibitionists believe in legal, regulated markets. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you come to vote, bet on America, place your bets for Sunday's game, or not. It is and should be your choice. Vote against the motion.
And the final statement. Thank you to Guy for what I hope was fun for you all. It was fun for me. Thank you to our hosts. We do not... Traditional regulation and law does not tend to come out of a vacuum. Sports betting and all forms of gambling have been heavily regulated in this country pretty much since the founding. I'm happy to sort of get into the historical regimes. They were, in fact, those regimes were there because there were dysfunctions arising from this that were becoming other people's problems. And we've talked a little bit about the dysfunctions. I think that Guy has unconvincingly explained away some of the spike in things like debt collection and defaults. When we have removed these prohibitions or regulations, they were not full prohibitions, we see a spike in the dysfunctions that they were trying to fight. I think that perhaps for once, instead of doing a Portland-style deregulation on drugs, we should arrest a radical social change before it comes and bites us in the ass. We are seeing a spike in the dysfunctions. We can deal with it now, or we can deal with it when it's a much bigger problem. I cede my time.
All right.
So thank you to the debaters. We'll see them on around.
But the real expression of your thanks will be in your vote, which we will collect now in the second round of a QR code. So those on civil who will be voting with us here in person, pull out your phones, cast your ballot. Hopefully your bet was correct. And we will be able to display the results of both votes to show what percentage change there was, as well as the victor. Let's give you a few minutes to do this.
Hold on. Easy.
You're think about this.
Entertainment substitute.
Yeah.
It's the perfect line.
Well, we're still very kind of you. I tend to think that there's a reason I've spent my life hiding behind the written word. So.
Okay, have the vast majority cast their votes. All right, to the folks in the back, we are still tallying. So, make sure you pull out your phones and maybe place a bet on the Super Bowl while I stall some time here. I heard that I think there's 15 billion being wagered this Sunday, if I'm correct. And
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Really? 15 million?
I mean, it may be 1.5 billion.
15 more like 5.
4 in 10 viewers, I think. Maybe some of them in here. Okay, and we have results forthcoming.
All right. So this is an Oxford-style debate, which means, of course, we voted before and after, and the winner will be determined by whoever had the greatest change in percentage in their favor. So the proposition, again, was should sports betting be banned in the U.S. and all 50 states? That's correct. So before, the percentage of people who agreed with the proposition was 20.59. Who disagreed was 64.71, with 14.71 undecided. After the debate, the people who agreed with the proposition dropped to 11.76. That's a drop of 8.82%. Disagree went up to 82.35%. That's an increase of 17.65%, which means Mr. Guy Bentley wins the debate.
So bad. My crowd.
Yeah. Thank you all once again for joining us. Thank you for the debaters. One more round for these gentlemen. Thank you. One more round for you all at the bar. And thank you to all of the people with Young Voices, AIER, and Civil, this incredible streaming platform we are so grateful to partner with for making this debate possible. Thanks again, and stay tuned for the next Fusion AIER and Young Voices debate. Thanks.
Thanks, man. Much appreciated. Thanks.